Welcome to another episode of Outrageous HR. Today, we're covering the growing importance of conducting annual self-audits for your Form I-9s to catch any early issues before ICE does. Here with us to talk about that today is Desiree Throckmorton. Desiree, I know we've done a few of these together, but if you want to reintroduce yourself for anyone who's new.
Hello again. I'm Desiree Throckmorton, as she said. I lead our I-9 services here at OutSolve.
Perfect. So let's jump on into the conversation. Can you tell us about a recent self-audit where someone thought they didn't have any errors, but they actually did?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to determine who the auditor is of the process, because if you have the people doing the I-9s, auditing the process, I think it's challenging to audit yourself in a way that would be very useful for the organization to gather information on maybe what's not being done right. If you're doing it a certain way and you don't realize you're doing it wrong, then it's pretty easy to continue doing it wrong. I've had a recent experience where they didn't realize that you couldn't complete Section 2 before Section 1, which they were doing it, on paper and, kind of the old school way. And that was something that kind of surprised me, that I saw that the dates were earlier for Section 1 than they were for Section 2, which really surprised me.
Very interesting. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's almost like if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong in some way or form, And then another thing I saw was over-documentation. I also saw they had accepted Social Security cards with restricted language. So sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And like I said, if you're the one auditing it and you're the one doing it, how do you know if you're doing it wrong?
Right. I think that's something that's come up in a lot of conversations I've had of you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
So we're grateful for experts like you.
Yeah.
All right. Moving into our favorite section. Well, second favorite maybe.
Okay.
Myth or fact. So I'm going to give you some statements and you will tell me if they are a myth or a fact.
Okay.
If you find a mistake on a Form I-9 during a self-audit, you can just use whiteout.
I think a lot of people may be wondering, what is whiteout?
Oh,
yeah.
good point.
It's a old concept for when people were, using, as we talked about earlier, paper I-9s, where they're completing this on a printed out form. But, in the case of a self-audit, maybe you're looking at one that was completed a long time ago. So hopefully that's the case and that you're not still, completing them on paper. But in that case, no, you don't want to use whiteout to hide the mistake. The guidance is basically that you want to be kind of transparent about what you've recognized that you found as an error and make the correction, initial date, etc., so that you're basically not hiding the fact that there's a mistake that was made. And that's a big part of the audit process is the correction. So, we talk all the time about doing a self-audit. Well, once you're done with the audit, you have to make corrections. And so you got to kind of prioritize those corrections and do them in a way that's aligned with the USCIS guidance. So I'd call that a myth.
Next, myth or fact, HR can fix any mistakes in Section 1 for the employee to save time and not have to track them down.
Myth, for sure. Absolutely. Section 1 is for the employee themselves to enter in the information, make any necessary corrections. So yeah, anyone that's on the employee representative side should not be making changes, corrections in Section 1.
Right.
Unless that is, they are the preparer translator and somehow they've been granted the ability to give that guidance.
All right, last one, myth or fact. ICE takes any self-audits into account as a good faith effort and will consider that when issuing penalties for any mistake.
Definitely a fact. They just, like we talked about before, there's a transparency in the self-audit process, and when you're trying to show that you've maybe made a mistake, but in good faith have remedied the issue so that you can move forward with the correct process or information, what have you, they will take that into consideration during the audit. But you do need to be, like I said, transparent about it and have it documented. I think that's one of the challenges that HR has is maybe the person who did it is no longer here. And so that institutional knowledge goes with that person. So you need to make sure there's a handoff of that information so it's, available in the circumstance of when that audit actually takes place.
So let's talk about self-audits. Can you walk us through what conducting a self-audit would look like?
Yeah, certainly. I would think that the first thing to consider is who's going to do it. In my opinion, it's probably someone who's outside of maybe HR or someone who's not doing the I-9. So in some cases, maybe you've got talent acquisition completing I-9s, and maybe you've got an HR compliance arm, but you just want to make sure that the people doing the I-9, like I said earlier, are not the ones conducting the audit. So that's a primary is, figuring out, well, who's going to do it? How many are you going to review, right? Ideally, for sure, you would review every single one. That can be very difficult depending on how many employees you have and how many people have terminated. There's retention practices in play for folks who have terminated. That's maybe for another day, but still a concept to be considered as part of the audit. I would say, a good idea or strategy is maybe determine your roster of people you're going to audit. See if you can find their I-9s in 3 days. Like, can you track down the I-9s within 3 days, just to kind of simulate the sort of stress of an audit, an ICE audit, because that's what you have is 3 short days to gather the information, and then you assess each and every one, and that can be fairly time consuming. And what I've seen is like sometimes the same agents or the same verifiers continue to make the same mistakes. And then sometimes those representatives trained someone else, and so they are also making the mistakes because the training sort of gap there of someone kind of perpetuating the mistake. And then determining a remediation effort. I think a lot of people forget that, like I said earlier, you got to go back and make corrections based on the audit. Like, doing the audit is just one part of it. Making the corrections is another. And we talked about, well, let's say you find issues in section 1. Who's gonna handle that? Well, certainly the employee has to do that. So you have to engage with the employee to get those corrections. And then same thing is true for section 2. You can, as the employer, make those corrections. So it's quite a process, but I think there's some main steps to cover: is who's doing it, who are you going to review, what's going to be your remediation effort, and what's your timeline.
Yeah. And if I'm conducting a self-audit, what are some things that I should look for on the forms?
Well, I mean, simply enough, the definition of substantive violation has recently changed to where, certain things that are missing that could have been corrected are now considered automatically substantive violations, which means they're, potential for fine right away. In the past, it used to be that you could correct them. You'd have 10 days, you could make those corrections, and they wouldn't be counted against you. Now they're automatically counted against you. So if your employer representative didn't sign it, if there were no dates, because if you didn't have the dates there, how do you validate that you completed it in the time frame necessary to be in compliance? Is the date of birth on the form? It used to be, is it in the right format? I think that's less of an issue than is the date of birth there and accurate. So I think it's a lot to try to unpack all the things that you would look for, but essentially you want every field to be filled out correctly. And the omissions are, I think, what gets companies.
Yeah. And you talked a little bit about this, the remediation effort. What are some concrete tips around what that action plan looks like once you've done the audit?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because you have to prioritize, which ones are those substantive errors that have been made that are correctable. So, for example, if you find in the audit that the I-9 was done late, you can't fix that.
Right.
You can't change time, but you can certainly put measures in place to prevent it. I always say do it early. After that person has accepted the offer, get that process going. Don't wait until their hire date. It's kind of an old school concept to do it that way. And I don't need to go into why, but so I'd say prioritize those things that you can do that are substantive violations. I would say go ahead and make those corrections according to the guidance. And USCIS does give you the guidance on how to do it. So I think it's figure out which ones are correctable. Which ones are employees that still exist? Because I don't think anyone's going to go to a terminated employee and say, come correct this for me. But you could certainly correct the section 2 on a terminated employee. So I guess that's the key, is just kind of prioritize based on like the severity of the error.
Right. So I have some questions here that are some frequently asked questions. So let's talk about what clients are asking.
Okay.
If we find out that we forgot to do an I-9 for an employee who's been here for 2 years, what do we do?
Do it. Get it done. Yeah, people ask that a lot. And I think that is a pretty easy answer. Make sure it's done, and do not backdate it. Do not make it appear as though it was done on time. That's definitely a no-no. If you are an E-Verify employer, then you would also need to run that case through E-Verify, and you'll have to indicate why it was late. And there's an option that says, through an internal audit, we discovered that, this was necessary. So that's not the exact statement, but essentially that's the concept.
Okay, cool. Can we ask an employee to bring in new documents during an audit just because we don't like the look of the photocopies we kept?
I have a hard time answering that question because I feel like it's very subjective in that we just don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, is it legible?
Right.
Do you have the features to be able to have the, what's the who issued the document? Like what is the document? Are the numbers of it, the document numbers readable? And the employee's information. So I'd be cautious on that one because it just really depends on how difficult it is to read it, or is it just I don't like the quality of this photo.
Right. Is it a grainy aesthetic or is it compliant?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a bit of a gray area.
Okay. Now it's time for my favorite portion of the show, rapid fire questions.
I think it's my favorite too.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Paper or electronic Form I-9s, what's best for compliance?
Absolutely electronic.
Should I-9s be kept in the employee's personal file?
Absolutely not. And can I say why? No?
Yeah, for sure.
Is that rapid fire? It's okay to have a long answer to a rapid fire question?
I think that's fair.
Okay. I would say the best practice is to maintain the I-9 outside of that file that, generally hiring managers have access to because, you've got social security number on there, you've got information about, their citizenship, their national origin, and their personal information that goes kind of beyond the nature of a manager employee. So I would say I'm not the only one, is that the best practice would keep it separate.
Okay. What is the most common paperwork error you see?
I would say probably the most common would be incorrect issuing authority naming convention. People are very inconsistent and actually probably get that wrong quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this is cheating, but also just doing it late.
Yeah.
But that's not really paperwork, so.
Dates.
Yeah. Process. Yeah.
Thank you again so much for joining us, Desiree. It's always a privilege to talk to you and to learn from your knowledge and your expertise, especially around I-9s.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
OutSolve offers an I-9 audit checklist that is designed to help you catch I-9 errors before they cost you. Download it at the link in the description. And if you're looking for a full-service I-9 partner, OutSolve specializes in expert-led, tech-enabled, scalable I-9 solutions for organizations of all sizes. Take the stress and guesswork out of your I-9 compliance by contacting a consultant at the link in the description or go to outsolve.com. As always, continue the conversation in HR Gumbo City, our Slack community built specifically for HR professionals. It's a great place to ask other HR professionals questions or for guidance or advice. HR Gumbo members get exclusive first access to checklists, guides, research reports, and more. Visit outsolve.com/HRG-city to join today. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Outrageous HR. We'll see you next time.